Welcome to the Ph.D. podcast project from the Yale's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. In each episode, we interview graduate students in different programs at Yale to learn about the exciting work being done at the frontiers of research. We will dive into the motivations behind their work and how it may impact our lives and those of future generations. I am Sandra, a rising second-year Ph.D. student in sociology. I am joined by Jazz Riley, a Ph.D. candidate in African American Studies and American Studies. We are excited to talk today with Demar Lewis, a sixth-year Ph.D. student in sociology.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Black at Yale, where we talk about aspects of the Black experience while being at Yale and highlight our graduate student experiences and research. I'm Jazz Riley.
And I'm Sandra Konofua.
Resident Sterling Professor of Sociology and African American Studies, Elijah Anderson, writes and speaks extensively about being Black in white spaces, the name of his most recent book, in ways that span generational experiences. And while highlighting problems that persist for generations, Anderson offers newer insight with solutions on occupying these spaces that draw deeply and intimately from engaging specific issues described by the exact people who are enduring the experience of being Black in a white space. The historical precedent that paves the way for Anderson in his unique and important ethnographic and analytical approach is Alexander Boucher. In 1876, Boucher, a graduate of Yale College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, became the first African American to earn a PhD from an American university. In 2021, 145 years later, with an increased number of Black and Brown students enrolled in GSAS, only 13.4% of the graduate student body belongs to an underrepresented group. And on today's podcast, we will discuss what it's like to be a Black graduate student at Yale with our special guest, Demar Lewis.
Demar Lewis IV was born in Los Angeles, California, and was raised in Denver, Colorado. He received his bachelor's from the University of St. Thomas's Opus College of Business, a Master's of Public Policy from the University of Michigan's Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy. Currently, Demar is a PhD candidate in the Departments of Sociology and African American Studies at Yale University. His research leverages multiple methods to broadly examine health consequences of lynching, policing, and social inequalities in the United States. Demar's dissertation explores how the lived experiences of Black people living in a large Midwestern city shape their visions for the future of community safety in America, and in turn, their relationship to the institution of US policing. In 2018, Demar was selected to participate in cohort 3 of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Health Policy Research Scholars Program. He is a proud alum of the McNair Scholars Program and a former associate fellow with the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers. Welcome to the show, Demar.
Thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Sandra, for having
me. How are you doing today, Demar?
I'm a little tired. I'm not gonna lie. I have been traveling a lot the last week or so for a conference, but also for some graduations, right? So, had some friends at Yale who graduated on Monday, and then also got to see some colleagues of mine graduate from Harvard the last couple of days. So, just got back last night, and I'm kind of recuperating, but we here.
That's so exciting. I'm glad that you're supporting other graduate students, especially at the end of this journey, because, I think it can be difficult going through the process to imagine the end. So when you get there and other people can support you, I think that's a great thing. So thanks for setting the standard in that way. Getting into our discussion today, what's one event that has your attention? It can be a good event, sad event, happy event, just something that is really grabbing your attention in this particular moment.
Oh, goodness. I think it's hard to pull, to name just one thing, because there's so many things happening at the same time. And so, whether we're thinking about, mass shootings that have transpired over, most recently in a, elementary school or middle school, right? Whether we're thinking about people being murdered at a grocery store, by white supremacists. Whether we're thinking about the fact that kind of quietly yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder by Derek Chauvin and his accompanying officers, right? There's a lot of things happening at the same time. And so, and all of this happening in the context where different nation states are at war, and or like one nation state is essentially using its absolute power to decimate population and remove them from their territory that they've been rightfully occupying. So yeah, I say it's really hard to pinpoint one thing, because I feel like I'm constantly trying to keep attention on all of the different things, right? And those just being things that have kind of made more recent headlines internationally, but let alone the things that are not even catching attention, right? Kind of the more routine inequities or more routine traumas that are here. So, but I think on a positive note, one thing that I have been leaning into, some of what I was saying when I came on is like graduation season, right? So like finding moments to celebrate, and to find moments of joy and positivity, especially amidst kind of the chaos of the moment that we're in. So I've been trying to lean into that a lot.
Yeah, I think, juxtaposing the celebratory happening at the same time or simultaneously as these really intense tragedies, I think is a really interesting way of just kind of characterizing part of the experience of being Black at Yale, which is not to suggest that it's in any way tragic, but it is supposed to be viewed as an accomplishment for many of us who do end up here. But that accomplishment involves enduring a lot of things that can be dangerous to our well-being while on campus, but also enduring the things that are dangerous to the well-being of Black people in the nation writ large, also the tragedies that affect us across racial lines, across class lines, in the world writ large. And so I think on that note of just recognizing how we have to consider both the good and the bad at the same time while still trying to find a way to exist in our world. I'm very curious about how these dynamics play into the kind of research that you're doing at Yale. If you could take a minute to just briefly describe your research, that would be great.
Sure. So this is coming from a mentor of mine recently who kind of helped me think through this a little bit. But, the way I would describe the work that I do is that my work focuses on historical and contemporary notions of safety and how Black people use those notions to organize their lives. So on one hand, I'm somebody who is a student of lynching, very much inspired by, the work of Ida B. Wells, Barnett, Monroe work, and other anti-lynching advocates to try to make sense of, how throughout history, as the United States was becoming the United States, trying to understand how people's right to be, their rights to citizenship were contested, and how that shapes when and where lynchings transpired. On the other hand, there's parts of my work focus on lynching that's kind of a little different, but it's trying to understand specific actors. So one of which is Tuskegee Institute and Monroe work in the work of Booker T. Washington, and kind of not only what were the practical and what's the word I'm looking for? Like, what were the objectives they were trying to accomplish with their work? But how did those values essentially influence their institutional interventions, but also the work that they did with documenting lynching as a phenomenon. In a more contemporary sense, I'm somebody who studies police violence. I'm somebody who is very astutely aware of, where police misconduct has been and continues to transpire, and some of the dynamics that, are shaping that environment. But with an understanding that, the institution of policing is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And so, in order to think about, what solutions we might need to co-produce safety, some of my work in my dissertation is trying to understand, how do people understand what their safety priorities are? How do they understand like what the most pressing needs are in their neighborhoods? And what do they see as being necessary to address those needs? And again, some of that might require looking at interventions beyond the institution of policing. Or maybe people see that that institution is fine. But, I say all that to say that, the work that I do is very much kind of impacted by and shaped by, the moment that we're in. But, I guess what brought me to the work is a little bit different than that. So.
Thank you so much for that rich and layered description of your research. As we think about the ways in which your research sort of examines the historic and contemporary notions of public safety and how Black people organize themselves around those understandings, what are your methodologies? What does that look like?
So I am somebody who I would self-identify as a Black studies trained sociologist, but I'm somebody who uses different methods, depends on the question. So, I'm somebody who is comfortable navigating archives and looking at historical documents and doing, different forms of content analysis or inductive rendering, you could say, to try to translate, how different actors have operated historically to the contemporary moment. I'm somebody who also can crunch numbers. I think coming out of college, I was a finance and accountant for a little bit, and finance and accounting for a little bit. And also in policy school, we're doing a lot of data stuff. So I definitely developed a comfort with, working with numbers and, looking at different data sets. But I'm also somebody who likes talking to people. I like being in conversation with people, being in space with people, and trying to understand kind of where they find themselves. So that to say, I use all different kinds of methods in the process of my work. And again, it really comes back to the question, and so in some cases, I would rather talk to people to understand from them what they see is going on, as opposed to looking at existing data, which may tell me about something, but it may not tell me about how people think about that thing. Or, there's things that, data that has already been collected and quantified doesn't capture, that only lived experiences will or narratives will. And at the same time, there's ways in which relying on administrative data or secondary data is actually really useful when you want to talk about the scale or the impact of something and where it exists across different locales. So yeah, I try to take kind of a more pluralistic approach to methods. I'm somebody who's trained as an urban ethnographer, even though, the work I'm doing right now is not necessarily a traditional ethnography. But when the time comes, I'm sure that that's another method that I will kind of lean into as well. So yeah, but I think for me, the question of method is always about what is the question I'm trying to answer and what is the thing I'm actually trying to do with the work, right? So, because I think different methods lend themselves to being utilized in different ways beyond just the production of an article or a book chapter or like another written document, but certain methods can capture different kinds of information that can be represented in different ways on the other side. So I try to have a big bag of tools.
Yeah, I really love what you said about the question of method being a question of what's the question that I'm trying to answer with my research and what's the thing that I'm trying to do. And so in that, we would love to know how you would define the mission of your research.
Ooh. That's why you guys send questions beforehand. No, I would say I believe that all people, but especially Black people, deserve access to the perpetual resources that they need to live happy, healthy, productive lives.
Absolutely.
And I would say that we live in a world where, the resources people need to live happy, healthy, productive lives are inequitably distributed, right? And so, what I hope to do with my work is to, I guess, challenge, on one hand, to challenge defenses of the status quo that are not necessarily honestly representing the material conditions that people are living in right now.
Yeah.
But, I think what I also hope is that my work can play a part in contributing towards like reimagining liberatory futures, like reimagining liberatory futures where, not only are people safe, but they're free,
Mhm.
or not only do people have access to, food and grocery stores, but they have access to affordable housing. Like they can be living in neighborhoods that are economically autonomous. So I think for me, that is the mission. But I think where I see myself right now is trying to inspire. Well, inspire is probably too big of a word. I'm trying to paint a picture of like, where have we been? How have people fought for freedom, for reimagining futures in the past? How do we make sense of the ways in which the ways that people are asking or beckoning us to reimagine the future in the future?
Mhm.
And then, I would love to be a part of the process and the conversation of kind of exploring like what different kinds of approaches might we try to pursue to co-produce safety and to co-produce outcomes that allow for people to live happy, healthy, productive lives. So, and yeah, and like I'm not, in saying that, I'm not saying that like the work that I'm doing is going to like create a landslide of any kind of way, but I rather see it as something that's contributing towards work that's already been done and is already happening, and it has always been happening. But that might be showing up in different ways now than it has historically.
Wow, I think that is lofty and not in a bad way. Like, we have to dream big, imagine big, right? In order to really create the world that we want. And so I really value and appreciate the way that you have characterized what you want your work to do in the world. Something that you said that really sits with me, you identified yourself as a Black studies sociologist, I believe.
Like I say, it's trained sociologists.
A
Yeah.
Black studies trained sociologist, which I think is just profound, right? I think it's profound for a host of reasons, because Black studies as a discursive field means something different for a lot of people. But what you mentioned when you were describing how you're approaching your work, you said that you love people, you are interested in data sets, and you're also essentially interested in writing ethnography, which to me are very different approaches to your work. But I also see, just coming from a Black studies perspective, how those things work in tandem with one another. And so I'm really curious if you could talk about, just based off of that fact alone, the different ways that you're approaching your work, how the university in any capacity informs, whether that's aiding or inhibiting, the kind of work that you're actually doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, call a spade a spade. Yale is a resource-rich institution. There's things that we have access to as graduate students and doctoral students that, quite frankly, other people at other universities don't.
Mhm.
So when I think about some of the projects that I started as an early career student, very much was a benefactor of different resources. If it was from the Center of Race and Indigeneity Transnational Migration, or the Digital Humanities Lab, the Gilder Lehrman Center for Slavery and the Study of Abolition, right? So like those are institutions within this institution that supported the early work I did. But then something happened where I was awarded a fellowship from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Health Policy Research Scholars Program. And that opened up doors in terms of being able to give me access to not just financial resources, but like the people resources that are required to do research, different kinds of research. And so I think being at a place like Yale I've had access to different forms of different resources that have allowed me to start up and invest in projects that matter to me based on the mission that I have. Then likewise, I've been able to benefit from different networks and programs and things outside the university that have also kind of helped me facilitate access for me to do the work that I'm called to do. And I think, I want to acknowledge both that, within the university, I've had, some good mentorship and some good supports, but I've also had to rely on things outside the university, particularly because, I'm in the social science discipline, which sometimes likes to put people in boxes and say, like, you can do this or that. Versus, and again, I talked about how my work thinks about historical things and it thinks about historical and contemporary notions of safety. Some people told me way back when you should just do one of those. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but that's not how my work does, right? Or I'm not being called to go in that direction. And so I think the resources I've been able to access have allowed me to do the work that's been meaningful for me always, and to put that at the center, as opposed to, being in a different kind of environment where I either didn't have access to those resources or had to make different decisions about the trajectory of where I was going to invest my time.
Yeah, Demar, everything you've shared has just been so thought-provoking and amazing. And I'm thinking about the next generation of scholars coming up, myself, Jazz, and others coming after us. And we would just love to know, what words of wisdom would you share with other Black students doing research at Yale?
Yeah, dream big, be audacious, live in your purpose, and always, always, always shoot your shot. I say that because, it is something Jazz had mentioned too, in response to kind of sharing my vision. It's like, as doctoral students, I would make a bet to say that we are entrepreneurs. We are people who are responsible for, to build something, right? And, what it is that we build and what we use it for, the different things, it's all up to us. And the sky is the limit. And I'll never forget something one of my mentors, Dr. Otis Johnson, says, which is, never take no from somebody who can't give you a yes, including yourself. Because we're very quick to put limits on ourselves.
So true.
What we can and can't do, or what is and isn't possible, when we actually may not be the best judge sometimes of what is or isn't possible, what we can or can't do. And so, dream big, be audacious, live in your purpose. It's so for people who have made it to this point of becoming doctoral students, whatever has brought you to this point has brought you to this point. Whatever it is that you said that you wanted to do that made you apply for a PhD program and decide to pursue a PhD, go live that into existence, live it into fruition, right? And you owe it to yourself and whoever else got you to this point to do that, right? Because universities are not going to do that for you. They're not going to hold your hand in that process. All they're going to do is open the door, right? And so, I definitely want to encourage students to, to always be mindful of, what brought them to this point, always to be mindful of the fact they are never alone, and that there are people they can not only access, but who are going through the things that they're going through as well. And there's ways to build community, and positive community, even in spaces that may seem inhospitable, right? But, it's those relationships with your peers, with staff, even sometimes with faculty, that can help get you through. But it's also important to look outside the university for sustenance and joy, for healing, for recovery, recuperation. So don't put everything into, work hard, but also learn how to rest hard too, because it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Wow, I think that was a word, as we like to say. I needed that word. So thank you. Thank you so much, Demar. We really appreciate you taking the time to record with us. And thank you all for joining us on our podcast, Black at Yale. Sandra, do you have any closing words before we go off air?
Nothing except to say that you're awesome, Demar, and we wish you all the best in the future with your research.
We really do, quite genuinely. So
I appreciate y'all. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the PhD podcast project from the Yale's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and check out other episodes on our website.